First of all, this class is in the marriage of Yitzchak and Yosef. I'm going to tell you the story. Yeah. I'm going to tell you the story of Avraham. Yes? You all heard of Avraham? The very first Jew, the beginning of the Jewish nation. But he has a fascinating story. Fascinating story that really begins even before he is born. Or maybe when he's born. The father of Avraham is a man called Terach. Terach is a very, very well-known, respected minister in the king's court. The king then was Nimrod. Very powerful king who ruled the world, who convinced the people of his time that he was an idol, that he had supernatural powers, that he could do many things. And one day the stargazers of Nimrod come to Nimrod, and they say, we see in the stars that a boy is going to be born who will destroy, who will fight against your kingdom. And so he immediately sent the decree to kill all the boys. And then Terach, who's one of the top ministers, says to the king, you obviously can't mean my boy as well. You know, I'm your buddy. He says, no, I don't mean your son. Guess what happened? To make this terrible decree to start killing all the boys. And the stargazers come back to to Nimrod, and they say, we saw in the stars a star coming out of the house of Terach and going in all four directions. Terach's son is the child who's going to be the one who's going to fight against your kingdom. So you have to go and kill Terach's son, which is no problem. We're talking about, times of Nimrod. So if you think the stargazers say that this person will be a threat to you, then go ahead, saying you killed the guy. So he immediately sends guards to the house of Terach to go take this young baby and to have him killed. The guards come to the house of Terach and they say, we want your baby boy. The king wants to kill him. And Terach goes inside, and instead of giving his own boy, what does he do? He takes the son of one of his maids, a very trusted maid in the home, who had also just given birth to a baby boy. He takes the maid or the slave's baby boy, gives it to the officers pretending as if it's his own son, and right when they leave, he takes his son and has him taken out of the city and hidden in the caves in the mountains somewhere far, far away from the city. And thus it is that Avraham grows up totally separated from any interaction with other people. I guess someone came once a day, once a week, whatever, to feed him, to take care of him, but he was totally removed from society. Living in a cave, you have a lot of time to think. Now, Avraham, even from an extremely young age, was a very deep intellectual thinker, very, very deep, very deep. And Avraham begins to wonder, why do I exist? How do I exist? Who created me? Who created the cave? Who created everything that exists? Until one day when Avraham is 3 years old, Avraham walks out of the cave for the very first time. He walks out of the cave for the very first time, and imagine you're living in the cave for the first 3 years of your life. And you walk out into the sunlight is blinding. It's absolutely overwhelming. The light of the sun is so powerful, he couldn't see. And he immediately says, this light, the sun, is so powerful, this must be the creator of the universe. So amazing. And he bows down to worship the sun, the creator of the universe. When suddenly what happens? Along comes a cloud, and the cloud covers the sun. The cloud covers the sun. And all of a sudden now he realizes, hold on, if the cloud can cover the sun, then the sun can't be the creator of the universe, because there's something more powerful than the sun, the cloud. The cloud is so powerful, it can block that unbelievably powerful sun that had blinded me that I couldn't even see. And so he decides the clouds must be the creator of the universe. It must be in charge. And then he watches as night comes. Where the wind blows away the clouds, and he sees how night comes. And now the sun disappears from view completely, and you have this beautiful, beautiful moon with the stars all around it, serving the moon. So the moon is the creator of the universe. Then he watches the wind blowing these clouds in front of the stars and away from the stars. Says the wind must be the most powerful creature in the universe. It can even blow the clouds that can block the sun. Until Avraham, at the young age of 3, begins to recognize that there must be an invisible God. A God that's all-powerful, omnipotent, omnipresent, a God that is able to control the entire universe, a God that's more powerful than anything we can imagine.
So he really recognized God before God recognized
At the age of 3 years old, he begins to recognize God. Now, even though he was only 3 years old, he didn't fully understand intellectually the full depth of everything that he had discovered. And he spends many years deep in meditation and thinking, and he was a deep intellectual. We always think of Avraham as a man that fed people, as an activist. Avraham, the first 40 years of his life, was almost exclusively focused on deep intellectual pursuit of truth, trying to understand the truth of the universe, understand the truth of nature, understand how the world really exists. That was his whole life. He was a genius. We're going to talk about this later tonight. He was such a genius, you have to recognize that at the time that he lived, everyone worshipped idols. Everyone worshipped idols. That's how people existed. And they had many idols. For everything that they wanted, they had a different idol. For health, you bowed down to one idol. For food, you bowed down to a different idol. For children, you bowed down to a different idol. For rain, you bowed down to a different idol. And Avraham was the first one to recognize that these idols are nothing. There's one God, not many gods. And this one single God is the all-powerful God that controls every other force of nature in the universe. And this one God is not visible. We can't see it. We can't talk to it. We can't relate. We can't see it, etc. Now, actually, I'll explain it now. The name, you're going to realize over the course of the next year that the name of a person is always going to be discussed. Almost always going to talk about the name of the person that we're discussing. Because in Kabbalah, basic idea in Kabbalah and in Hasidus is that the name of a person, or the name of an object, of any object, reflects his true reality. So in Hasidus it explains that the name of Avram, when Avram was first born, his name was Avram. Later God changed his name, we'll talk about that later. What does the word Avram mean? So Avram is 4 Hebrew letters, it's 2 words. Av, Aleph, Av, father, Ram, which is exalted. In Kabbalah, Av, or father, is Chachma, with the ideas, knowledge, and the mother is the idea of taking the knowledge, Bina, and developing, etc. Avram means the highest ideas of Chachma, the highest ideas of brilliance, of knowledge, of being able to discover new things, but they're Ram, exalted. Exalted means that it's way beyond the normal, way beyond the average. So everyone has some level of Chachma, of knowledge, of wisdom, and Avram was way beyond. His intellect was brilliant. So when we think of Avraham as an activist who gave out food and fed people in the desert, and we're going to talk about that soon, that's not his core identity. That's not what his name describes about him. His name describes an unbelievably genius person who is intellectually way beyond anybody else of his generation. He discovers single-handedly, on his own, he discovers the truth of reality, the truth of existence. Avraham will later become a teacher and explain to people and guide people. Avraham writes many books. Many books. There's one book that still exists from him. The book of, Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, describing the creation of the universe, one of the deepest books that exist, that most people don't ever even try to study, was written by Avraham Avinu, originally. So, we actually find that Avraham is a genius. Now, Avraham comes to the world, comes back home eventually, I continue the story. He comes back home to his family's house many years later when the threat had been forgotten and the Stargazer said that the threat is gone because nothing had happened. He hadn't threatened Nimrod. And they said he's like a cousin or some relative. He didn't say it's their son, obviously. And he begins to argue with his family and with his friends and tries to show them the foolishness of their ways. One very famous story is that one day his father leaves him in charge of the shop. You know the story? His father leaves him in charge of the shop. Now his father, besides being a very important minister, also made idols. Only important people made idols. So he leaves him in charge of the shop. He tells his son, the more important the person is, the bigger the idol you sell them. If it's a regular schlepper, you give him a small idol. A macher, that's so important, give him a big idol. So a guy comes in, big looking guy, boy, says, I'm an important person, I want a big idol. So he says to him, and this one's a really big one, this is a good one. Now Avraham says to him, how old are you? So I'm 50 years old. He says, aren't you embarrassed to worship something that my father just made yesterday? So the guy got all confused, he got all finished. So he walks out. Then a lady comes in and says to Avraham, help me, I was just robbed yesterday. Rob broke into my development, they stole my car, I need an idol to protect me. So he says, I don't understand. And they stole everything out. So he said, you don't have idols in your home? He said, I do. They stole my idols. So I need to buy new idols. So he said, so if they stole the idols, and the idols couldn't even protect themselves from being stolen, you think the idols will protect you? She also gets confused. So finally, this person walks in with this big offering. He said, well, I'll bring an offering to one of the idols. So Ram says, how should we choose which idol should get the offering? So Ram takes an axe, and he smashes all the idols, except for the largest idol in the store. Smashes them all. His father comes home after his business trip. Hope it's everything okay. He walks into the store. Chaos. Everything is smashed, destroyed, broken. He says, Avraham, what happened here? He says, me? I'm innocent. I'll tell you exactly what happened. This person walked with a big offering of fruits, etc. And said, I should choose which idol to give it to. I said, I can't choose. I don't know the idols. So let the idols fight it out. So he said, whoever's the strongest idol, they can take the offering. So all the idols, he tells his father, all the idols started to fight with each other and punch each other and kick each other and attack each other until the biggest idol grabbed the axe, smashed all the other idols and took the offering for himself. His father says, you think I'm a fool? You think I'm an idiot? You think I don't know that idols can't smash other idols and they can't move and they can't fight and they can't scream? So he says, so father, if you admit that idols can't move, why do you worship them? His father realized his son was right. The problem is, Nimrod also realized this story, and the worst side to get around, the Terach had a son that was a big troublemaker, and they realized this was the son that had that had been in the stars, and Nimrod has Avraham arrested. Avraham comes to the palace, he's in chains. Yeah, he was arrested. Nimrod arrests Avraham. And he's trying to convince Avraham to bow down to him, and he says, I'm a God, you have to bow down to me. So Avraham says to Nimrod, no problem, I'll bow down to you. I'll accept you as a God. I just have one request. One request to prove that you're a God, and I will accept your power. So it says, okay, what's your request? Nimrod says, if you're in charge of the whole world and you created the world, tomorrow morning, instead of the sun rising from the east to the west, small request, not a big deal, just make the sun rise from the west to the east. Then I'll surrender, I'll say you're a God. And Nimrod can't do that, obviously, so he gets angry. So he says, tell me what I'm thinking. What am I going to do? You're not a God. And he publicly tells Nimrod he's not a God. Nimrod gets so angry. Well, quickly, there's a lot to talk about tonight. Nimrod gets very angry, throws him to the furnace. I'm sure you know the story. And there, God does a miracle. And for 3 days, he's in the forest. And God made the forest into a beautiful garden. And when Avraham comes out of the fire, Nimrod himself says, how did you do that? And the guard that wanted to take Avraham out of the fire was so hot. For 3 days, they collected firewood. They chained him up. And for 3 days, they were bringing firewood to burn this heretic who was fighting against Nimrod. And after 3 days, the fire was so hot, they put him on top of the entire fire. The fire was so hot that when the guards tried to take Avraham out, they got burnt from the heat of the fire. So then Avraham walks out, and Nimrod himself bows down to Avraham. The king Nimrod bows down to Avraham. Avraham says, don't bow down to me, bow down to Hashem. Now, after that move away, we're going to get to the rest of the story soon. But here's what we see so far. Both Avraham and, remember the guy we talked about last week? Noah, actually, in many ways, are very similar. They both are spiritual giants, living in a completely corrupt, immoral world, and they're connected to their God and to truth, and they both are considered righteous. They both walk, both of them, says about both of them, and they both walk with God. By Noah, they walk with God. By Avraham, they walk with God. They walked with God. They were holy, spiritual people who didn't care about anyone in the generation, and they were not afraid to stand up for truth. As we discussed last week, Noah spent 120 years building an ark, telling the world, guys, get ready, there's a flood coming, you're all going to die, and they laughed at him, and he didn't care. And Avraham was willing to stand up to the world and say to his father, to Nimrod, the most powerful man alive at the time, and say to him, I know you're powerful, I know you think you're hot stuff, but guess what? Guess what? God is in charge. I'm not scared to say the truth. Now, there is a difference between Noah and Avraham, in that Noah didn't work for his holiness. Noah was born to a very holy father, and the holy grandfather, Methuselah, was his grandfather, and he was raised in holiness, and he was educated in the truth of God, and Avraham had to self-discover. So Avraham was about teshuvah in the ultimate sense. He himself discovered God without having a teacher, Later in his life, I just clarify, he did have teachers later in his life. The son of Noach, Shem, and Shem's grandson, Aver, had a yeshiva in Israel, and Avram traveled there several times to study, but that was much later. His search for God began within himself. No one taught it to him. He on his own said, this is the truth of reality, this is the truth of existence, and he went full force, wasn't scared. So Noach is like we say a FFB, like from birth, he was raised that way, and Avram is about to show his self-discover. But they're still very similar in that they understand the truth in a world full of darkness and lies. The question is, how do you react to that world? How do you respond to the world? So last week we talked about Noach's response. And today let's talk about Avram's response. How does Avram respond? How does Avram react to a world of such absolute corruption and immorality and darkness, where people are worshiping a human being, where they deny the existence of God completely and absolutely? Avram responds by becoming a connector. Avram is focused on the mission of inspiring the world and bringing them closer to the truth. But unlike Noach, who preached destruction, who preached death, who preached you're going to be punished for your sins, how did Avram set about to inspire the world? With chesed, with kindness. And Avram is considered a man who is the embodiment of the spiritual attribute of chesed, the spiritual attribute of kindness in the universe. God created the world with different attributes. The ultimate embodiment in human form of chesed is Avraham, a man of pure kindness who wanted to give to everyone. And again, many of you know the stories, how Avraham had a tent with doors on four sides. Every side of his tent was open to the public, and all these travelers and all these visitors would come through his tent, and they would stop and they would talk to him, and he would teach them, and he would inspire them, and he would feed them food. Because when you feed someone, it's easier to inspire them. We have a bowl of popcorn in front of you, it's much easier to absorb words of Torah. So, Marshall, I'll be watching. So he inspired them through food. And then came the end of the meal, and he would say to them, he would say, thank you very much. And he was polite to say, thank you for the meal. So he said, don't thank me, thank the one who created the food. So created the food? Who created the food? He started to teach them. You should bless God. Baruch she'achalnu m'shalom. Blessed is the one that you ate from his food. And explain how God created the food. And either they would understand the truth of what he was saying and they would begin to praise God, or they would say, I don't believe in this God. I don't want to worship this God. I don't believe that he created the food. I believe in other gods that created the food. And then I would say, if that's the case, here's your bill. And you give them a bill, but kosher prices. Even before the Jews got kosher, he gave them kosher prices. And they look at the bill and say, what? All that? He said, yeah, it wasn't to find good meat and steak and tongue and wine in the desert. And very quickly they understood what Avraham was saying about God and began to teach the whole world to call out the name of God. And I should have put it in the text, but I didn't. It says in the verse, I didn't put it in the text, I should have. But it says in the Talmud that Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem Kel Olam, that God over there, Avram called out in the name of the God of the universe. And the Talmud tells us, don't read it Vayikra, that he called out in the name of God, just change one vowel. And the word will then be Vayakri. He made others to call in the name of God. How did he make others to call in the name of God? Because he connected to them. He fed them. He related to them. He engaged with them. He fed them. He talked to them on their level. And then he was able to convince them of the truth of God. And by the way, he didn't only feed them, but his arguments were on their level. When he would debate with them and he would explain to them, he didn't come with like, God said you're going to die, or this is the word of God, so says the Lord, hallelujah, whatever, you know what I'm saying? He didn't quote Isaiah 53. What did he do? He understood their arguments, and he responded using their own logic to prove the weakness of their logic. Another story with Nimrod, going back, just to give you an idea of the way he used their logic against them. So when Nimrod wanted him to bow down, he was in prison. So Nimrod said, at one point, Nimrod just wanted him to pretend to bow down. Nimrod thought he wouldn't convince him, but at least he should come not a threat, he should pretend to bow down. So Nimrod said to him, I'll tell you what, you don't want to bow down to me, you don't believe I'm a God, fine. but at least bow down to fire. Both agree that fire is more powerful than you. Fire can burn man. So fire is a very powerful force. You agree fire is powerful? Bow down to fire. So Avraham said to them, I agree, but fire is very powerful, but water is more powerful than fire. Water can put fire out. So Nimrod said, okay, so bow down to water. Says, but the clouds can carry water. So the clouds are more powerful than water. They can contain the water, hold the water inside them, and we should bow down to the clouds. So Nimrod said, okay, fine, bow down to the clouds. He says, yeah, but the wind blows the clouds around. So the wind can blow the clouds, and the wind's more powerful than the clouds. So okay, fine, bow down to the wind. Says, yeah, but man, who has holes in our nose, and our nostrils, and our ears, we can hold breath inside of us. So if we can hold wind inside of us, man must be more powerful than the wind. So fine, that's what I said in the beginning. Bow down to me, bow down to man. So yeah, but fire can burn man. You understand? So he used their own logic to show them the foolishness of their argument. So it's a very different way of communicating with somebody. Some people communicate, I'm right, you're wrong. That's the starting point. I'm right. Now I'm going to tell you why I'm right. Many people talk that way. Avram didn't talk like that. You know how Avram talked? What do you say? Let's use your words. Let's use where you currently are to find the truth. It's not that I'm going to tell you that I'm right and I'm smarter than you and show you how much I know. I'm going to use your word, where you're holding, and I'm going to help you discover where you're lacking or where you need to change your worldview.
What do you mean when you said the truth?
What?
What do you mean when you said the truth?
What is the truth? The truth of existence, the truth of God, the truth that the world's not created by random multiple forces of nature, but the world's created by one indivisible, all-powerful, single God, Hashem Echad. So, good so far, good? So, question, yeah.
So, Noah, Avraham, we're going to learn about some other people over the course of the weeks. Could we say that there was an underlying foundation, an underlying theme that would stand on its own, that carries through?
Every single person?
Yes. So, I mean, you said that Abraham and Noah, they sought to inspire the world to bring it closer to truth, the truth of Hashem. So, would that be a conceivable?
Well, every single person has a mission to bring the world closer to God. So that's an underlying motif in every human being. We're all created with a purpose to make the world come closer to God. How we do it, and there's many different facets to human interactions and human dimensions. So different people will be able to focus on different things. But let's just focus on last week and this week. I don't know about the future. We'll get to the future when we get there, right? Both Noah, which is exactly what I was going to say now, is that both Noah and Avraham face the same challenge. They both face the challenge how to teach truth to a world full of lies, deep, deep in its own darkness. And the answer, and that really is a question for us. We're trying to find a lesson for us, how we should live our lives based on the life teachings of Avraham. So, how do we influence those around us? How do we become effective influencers? Because every one of us has a circle of influence, and everyone has people that we interact with and we engage with and that we care about. And every one of us has certain truths and standards and values and morals that are important to us. The question is, how do we effectively teach them? Our children, our spouses, our friends, our co-workers, our neighbors. How do we become an influencer where we can take that which we feel and that which we know and make that become the mindset of the people around us? So one of the best examples in history is Avraham. Avraham made thousands, if not tens of thousands of converts. Thousands and thousands of converts. And again, in a time where it was not politically correct or it was like so far-fetched. It was so fundamentally different. I gave an example this morning. It popped in my head this morning. You know, we can have an argument about driving a car. So you want to choose a Toyota, and I tell you to drive a Honda. Right? We can discuss which car is better. So in that time, people say, which God is better, this God or that God? And Roman's coming and saying, don't choose any car. Any car that you can see and touch and feel and drive is already something tangible. Just jump and you'll go where you need to go. That's kind of like what he was telling them. Believe in an invisible God. Every single human being that worshipped tangible gods, physical gods of stone, of wood, of that you can see, that you can touch, that you can hold. And yet Avraham had to teach deep ideas, deep truth. He did it. How? Because he first connected to them. He connected to them. And when we want to know how can I become an influencer, the answer is, what's the answer? Utilize the chesed, the kindness of Avraham, the the non-judgmental love to every single human being, even to the Arabs, even to the idol worshippers. He welcomed them in. And in fact, we'll go to the first text now, text 1, it's chapter 18 from Genesis. I'm not going to share the text. But in chapter 18, you all know the story. Verse number 4, when Avraham has 3 visitors come to visit him, right? The 3 angels come to visit Avraham, and he sees these men outside, and what did he think they were? Arabs, idol worshippers. He runs to them, the verse says, he comes to them, he says, please come stay in my home, I'm going to feed you. And then he says, please let a little water be taken, and bathe your feet, and recline under the tree. Why does he tell them, take some water and wash your feet before you even sit down? As Rashi tells us, why did they have to bathe their feet? Because he thought that they were Arabs who prostrate themselves to the dust of their feet. He was strict not to allow any idolatry into his house. So here we see black and white clear. These are people, these 3 angels, he thinks are idol worshippers. He thinks that they're so far from his lifestyle that they literally worship the sand on their feet. Now for us to imagine, that's hard. None of us worship the sand on our feet. It's hard to imagine that kind of, it's like crazy. And yet, despite the fact that these are people that are diametrically opposed to the worldview and to the values and the ethics by which Avraham lives, what does Avraham say? Come to my home. Let me wash off your idol worship. Let me wash off your feet. Let me feed you. And he gives them, you all know the story. We don't need to read the whole text inside. 1 second. He gives them a full 5-star dinner. Each one gets their own tongue and freshly baked bread that was made that day. Bread, milk, cream, everything beautiful. Yes.
I just had a timeline question, because there was no such thing as Arabs when Abraham was alive.
Michael asked the same question before the class. Yishmael, the question is, were there Arabs before Yishmael was born? That's your question, right? So there were people living in the land. Yishmael was the father of Islam. We say they're Arab, but there were people living in the land there. What were they? Martians?
They weren't Arabs.
What were they?
Canaanites, Philistines.
No, Philistines for sure not. Philistines is from much, much later. The name Palestine came from the Roman Empire. But what does the word Arab mean? What does the word Arab mean? We say Arabs. What does it mean? People live in a certain area. It's not a religion or a philosophy. It's just people live in a certain part of the world. Right? I mean, I'm not an expert on the word Arab. I think Arab is just, you live in a certain geographical location. You can have Muslim Arabs. You can have Christian Arabs.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, okay. Okay. So, now I'm going to take you to the next part. Now I'm going to the beautiful part. So we know, and many of the stories you all know, or some of you know anyway, Avram was effective at being an influencer because he connected to the people. But you know why else he was effective? In fact, the real reason why Avram was an effective influencer, it's not just because he fed them and he talked to them and he knew how to use their words to convince them and to argue them. He was very charismatic and caring and connected. You know why he was able to influence thousands of people to become more connected to God? Because Avram cared about them. He didn't just connect to them and show kindness to them, which is already an amazing level of greatness. Avram, deep in his heart, cared about each and every Arab and each and every idol worshiper and each and every human being that he interacted with. Every random stranger that walked through his open tent, Avram cared deeply in his heart that they should understand the truth. How do we know that Avram didn't just show kindness to the people he interacted with? But how do we know that he cared deeply for them? How do we know that Avram cared deeply for each and every idol worshiper that was different than them? The answer is because he prayed for them. Last week I told you, how did we know that Noah didn't care deeply about the people at his time? Because when he found out that they were going to be destroyed, what did he do? Nothing. He didn't pray for them. When Avraham finds out that God is going to destroy the city of Sidon, the most wicked, evil people in the city of Sidon. We're going to talk next week, we're going to talk about Lot, and next week we're going to talk about the city of Sidon. And what kind of evil is the evil of Sidon. We'll talk about that. But for now, we know it's an evil place. Avraham hears that these evil, wicked, corrupt, disgusting people, sadistic people, wicked. When you talk about evil, I can tell you some stories that'll make your blood boil. Wicked people. And he hears them be destroyed. And what does Avraham do? Text number 23, verse number 23 from the same chapter. When God tells Avraham, I'm going to destroy the people of Sidon, Vayagesh Avraham. Avraham approached. Now Yomer, he says to God, will you even destroy the righteous with the wicked? And then for the next 30 verses or so, Avraham is praying to God and arguing with God. If there's 50 righteous people, save the 5 cities. If there's 45 righteous people, if there's 40, if there's 30 righteous people, if there's 20 righteous people, and he goes on and on. And Avraham doesn't just say God, please save them. Condolences on Facebook with the mitzvah after the tragedy. You post your thoughts and prayers on Facebook. Okay, I did my religious duty. Nothing. I posted on Facebook. He argues for a long time, but he doesn't just pray to God for a long time. Look at the word the Torah uses. The Torah doesn't say that God, Avraham prayed. It doesn't say Avraham hitpalel, or he spoke to God. It says vayagesh. Vayagesh means, as Rashi says to us, he approached is an expression which is used approaching for war. It says about Yaakov, and Jacob drew forward. Another verse in chapter 44, also when Yehuda approached Yosef to fight with him to release his brother Binyamin. You have also, when you're approaching for prayer, when Elijah came near, for all these, Abraham approached, not just to pray to God, God, please be nice, but to put all of his heart and soul, to speak harshly, to placate, and to pray. Meaning, okay, so why was it? Meaning, Avram didn't just pray to God. He didn't just post on Facebook thoughts and prayers. He didn't just open the prayer book quickly. Okay, I prayed. He comes ready to fight with God. He's going to put his reputation on the line. He's going to use up his brownie points. He's going to argue, and he does. It's not just a one-minute prayer. He argues with God 5 different back and forths. So eventually, he tried as hard as he could because he cared deeply about them. Why does he care deeply about them? Because he cares deeply about them. He understands that these people came into my life for a reason. It's my job to inspire them, to teach them, to leave them better off knowing the truth. So most people think, why should I care about you? You're not my family. That's the mentality you're coming with. Why should I care about you? I have my obligation to my family, to my kids. You're not one of my family, and I'm not responsible to you. Avram's mentality is the exact opposite. Every single human being that I interact with, even if they're idol worshippers, even if they bow down to the sand on their feet, even if they're from the wicked city of stone, they do horrific, terrible acts of evil and violence, I have an obligation to take care of them, to care for them. Avram loved them. He was worried about them. And so these people didn't know them. They're in stone. And he prays for them. He begs God for them. He approaches in prayer because these are people that are in his time. And if they live in the same time as him, in the same land as him, even if they are opposite as can be, I don't just have to try and teach them, but even when I couldn't teach them, I have to pray for them. I have to care about them. They have to hurt me in my soul to know that people that are alive in my time are so wicked they're going to be destroyed.
What makes you not to give up?
When you care about someone, you don't give up. When you care about your kids, you give up because you tried and you give up. When you care deeply, you never give up.
But how can you care so much when you know those are people that really killed or did great kids and did bad things?
So Sarah's question is, how could you care about someone that is wicked?
Very wicked.
Very wicked. Not just do you think they're wicked, they actually are wicked. And the answer is that if you care, I'll answer your question like this. If your child, God forbid, was to do something wicked, I'm not a serious question. If your child, God forbid, was to do some terrible things, would you care about them any less? No. Because the reason why you care about your child is not because your child does ABC and because your child got these grades and did this and that's why you care about them. It's not a contractual relationship where if you do what I want, then I'll do what you want. That's a business agreement. Right? I tell you to do this, you do, I'll do that. So when you care about someone deeply in your heart because they're a part of you and because they're, no matter what they do, you'll care about them. So Avram, the same way you'll love your kids no matter what they'll do, and you'll care about them no matter what they'll do. Avram why? Because your starting point is, this is my child.
Okay,
That's a starting point. The starting point is not, you deserve it. That's judgment. That's, you deserve it, I'll care about you. You don't deserve it, I don't. You agree with me, I like you. You don't agree with me, I don't like you. That's not care. That's not Avram. Avram said, you live at the same time that I live, you live in the same country that I live in, then I care about you. It's my obligation to care. The starting point of Avram is chesed. Starting point is chesed. Very intelligent. We're going to talk about that in 2 minutes. You understand? This is such an important point for today. The times in which we live. Avram is such a role model. Such a role model. Because Avram, it's not that he didn't have very, very deeply held convictions. We sometimes think that people that are moderates and are able to talk to everyone because they don't really feel this way or that way. They're they don't have a strong opinion. There was no one more extreme in his worldview than Avram. Avram was willing to die for what he believed in. He was willing to tell Nimrod, not willing to. He did. He said to Nimrod, kill me. I'm not going to change my beliefs. That's how strongly Avram believed in what he believed in. And yet, despite how deeply he believed in what he believed in, when there were people that believed as opposite as could be, not only did he not do what Noah did, which was say us versus them, I have to protect myself, so I'm going to create this moral space in between me and those wicked, evil, corrupt, terrible people. Avram says, they're human beings, so I care about them. They're part of my generation. They're my neighbors. They live in the same place as me. I'm in Shechem, they're in Stone, but they live in the same land as me. I care about them. I'm going to pray, even if I can't change them, I still care so much that even if I couldn't change them, it bothers me, it pains me, I'm going to pray for them. It's very important. I mean, the relevance of today, I don't need to be any more specific, I think it's abundantly clear on all of us. Now, most people only have one identity. If a name reflects your identity, your core essence, your core being is reflected in your Jewish name, in your Hebrew name, that your God-given name. So most of us only have one identity, right? Who we are. However, Avraham, one second. Okay. However, Avraham is very unique. Avraham gets a second name, which means that Avraham actually has two different identities. He becomes a new person when God changes his name. It's not just God, gave him a different license and he spelled his name differently. When God changes the name of a person, what does that mean? God is changing their core identity, the very being, the very essence of who is, what is Avraham, changed from Avram to Avraham. So now let's talk about the second name of Avraham, shall we? Torah tells us, why is his name changed? Says the Torah, chapter 17, the third text that we have in the papers in front of us. And your name, this is by the bris, by the covenant of the bris ben Habsam, by the bris ben Habsam, the covenant of the parts. God says to Avram, if you remember the story, he was where God promised him the land of Israel. And Avram says, what use is the land if I have no children to inherit me? So then he makes the covenant of the parts where he cuts the animals, he walks through them. And at that point, God says to Avraham, no longer will your name be called Avram. Avraham. Now your name shall be Abraham. Avraham, we're adding the letter Hey into your name. Why? God gives a reason. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. As Rashi explains to us, that the word Avraham is like an abbreviation. Not an acronym, but an abbreviation. Meaning, like can't is cannot, but combined into one word. So there's an expression where God is saying about Avraham, as the verse says explicitly in the verse, Avraham has now become the Av Hamon Goyim, the father of the multitude of nations. He has shown such tremendous care and devotion and love for each and every person alive in this time, all people, all parties, everyone, that he's now become the father of all of these nations, and therefore his name Avraham with the Hey means it's like an acronym of Av Hamon Goyim, the father of all nations. And we understand very simply, it's obvious after everything we discussed, why God is calling him the father of the nations. He truly cares about all the nations. He's the father of all the nations. Everyone, Islam and Christianity and Judaism, they all come from Avraham. Avraham will change the world more than any other human being, perhaps, in bringing monotheism and belief in God to the world. So his efforts are being recognized by Hashem, and he's being given a new name to reflect his new identity because he has become the father of all people. Why? Because he cares deeply for all people. Now I have a question. Yeah, make sense? Yes? Good. So Avraham, Hamon Goyim, father of the nations. I want to ask you a simple question, but it's a good question. I like simple questions. They're the best questions. Av Hamon Goyim. Is there any letter Resh in those words? Av Hamon Goyim, father of the nations? No. So why is the Resh still in the name Avraham? Remember Sarai, who had her name changed? I won't go to the technique, it's confusing. Sarai has her name changed to Sarai. The letter's taken away. The Yud is gone, the Hey comes. If Av, this person we're talking about, is the father of nations, you want a name that's an abbreviation of Av Hamon Goyim, his name should have been changed from Avram to Avham. Change the Resh to a Hey, Avham, the father of the nations. It would sound much more like the words we're trying to say. How does the Resh fit into the words Av Hamon Goyim? There's no Resh in any of those three words. Good question.
What is the Resh?
That's what I'm asking you. I asked you first.
I don't know. It's in my name.
No, the letter Resh is a letter Resh. But it doesn't fit to the name before. So the commentators say that before he was the father of Aram. Aram was originally from a place called Aram Naharaim, so he was the father of Aram. And now he's the father of all the nations. So not only Aram is included in all the nations. So all the nations you have Aram is whatever the technical answers. I'm asking you a fundamental question. We're trying to understand the identity of the father of the Jewish people, Avraham. Why is there a Resh? If he became the father of all nations, why is there a Resh there?
Could be the Resh means Rama or something.
It's Ram. You came late. Yeah. So we said earlier tonight that what's the Resh from? Avram. The first name that he had meant that Av is intellect, wisdom, knowledge, Chachma. Father represents the greatest knowledge or wisdom has. And Ram is that he wasn't just smart and intellectual. Avram was an intellectual of all intellectuals. He was intellectual in a way that no one else in the generation was as wise and as brilliant, as intellectual as Avram to discover the truth of reality the way Avram discovered reality. So what's the ratio of Avram? A knowledge that's exalted. A knowledge that's, the intellectualism of his past life. So if anything, the question can be stronger. What's Avram now, when he's in his later years of his life? Is he an intellectual or is he an activist? Is he a deep philosopher meditating on the truth of God? Or is he a preacher and a rabbi and an activist? Going around, teaching the world, feeding the world, inspiring the world? Which one is he? The Torah deliberately leaves the letter Resh inside the name Avraham to tell you that even when he was the most active as humans and a person could be, even when he was engaged in teaching and inspiring and in feeding and in interacting and fighting wars and all everything he did, he never lost the Resh of his intellectual search for truth, of his search for meaning, of his search for the oneness of Hashem that brought him to where he was. You know what happens to many people? Politics, people go to non-profit, people go to open organizations. I'm thinking of an example, I don't get into any one particular one. They start with noble, they have good reasons why they get into it. Right. Politics is the easiest example, but you find that there was recently a very famous charity that also, all the heads of the charity were like, they're supposed to be supporting women instead of doing doing the exact opposite. How does it start? They start with noble intentions, a lot of them. But then, you get carried away, in keeping your job and staying elected, and slowly you drift from your original passion and your search for truth and to make the world a better place. And you become activists. How was Avraham? Noach had a problem. What was Noach's problem? Noach said, if I'm going to engage the world, if I'm going to sit and engage and interact and allow these people into my home, they'll contaminate me. They'll corrupt my children. They'll teach them all these crazy ideas and things that I don't believe in and values I don't want my children to hear about. I need to disengage from them. How was it possible for Avraham to be able to engage the world, be part of the world, change the world, without the world changing him? Because all of the time that he was in the world and teaching the world and debating and arguing and teaching and inspiring, he never forgot the resh of Ram. He never forgot the resh of being exalted, of being way, way, way above and beyond the petty arguments and the petty discussions and the back and forth with the people he was engaging with. He never ever forgot the deep truth and the deep idea that he had discovered on his spiritual journey of meditation, of learning in the yeshiva Shem Ve'ever, etc. 1 second. Understand? This is for us too. If we want to be like Avraham, if we want to be effective influencers, if we want to be able to change the mind and the heart and the souls of the people that we care about, we need to care about them. We need to be on their level, care about them, but without forgetting our own resh, without forgetting our own deep search for truth, without forgetting what it is that we know inside our own hearts. We can't become so with the people, with those who are trying to change, and we become like them. The very, very famous Mishnah on the ethics of our fathers that describes the behavior of Aaron. So the Aaron, I should not put it whatever. He loved every single person. He loved peace. He pursued peace. Umekarvan la Torah. He would bring them close to the Torah. And the Zohar points out he didn't bring the Torah close to them. He brought them close to the Torah. There's a famous joke about there was a big clock in the middle of the city. Big clock in the middle of the city. And then people, one day, what happened? It was hard. People looked up. It was hard to see the clock. It was hard. So they decided that they should lower the clock. Instead of having to look up so high, like break your neck to see the clock, they should make it like at eye level. So I take this big clock. They put it down at street level. Everyone who walked by could see it. More people see it this way. If it's up high on top of the tallest building, only people that look up see it. They put it down. Now everyone can see the clock. You know what happened? A few weeks later, the clock broke. No, the clock broke. Why did the clock break? So they're trying to figure out why did the clock break. And they realized that in the past, when people wanted to know what time it is, they would look at their watch, they would look up, and if the time wasn't the same, they would adjust their watch to the time on the clock on the top of the building. The moment they lowered the clock down to street level, you know what happened? Oh, the clock is wrong. So my clock is right. My watch is wrong? Of course not. So everyone started adjusting the time on the clock. So every day, this guy adjusted this way. The other person came back and said, oh, it's 2 minutes this way, 2 minutes back that way. Of course, the clock breaks. You understand? Avraham was able to, Noach didn't know how to do this, but Avraham was able to connect and to care and to engage deeply and truly and authentically with every single sinner and wicked person of his time. But even though he authentically cared about them and engaged with them and listened to them and talked to them, he never for a second forgot his own inner truth. He never forgot his own inner, what's my own resh, my own run, what's my why? What's my why? He never forgot that. If you never forget that, then you can inspire others. Okay, before I close off, I'll take questions.
So Avraham is Resh, Hey, and Mem. So the Hey is in the middle between the Resh and Mem, Ram, right? Isn't Hey God's name inside to elevate it like...
Just Hey by itself, no. Just Hey by itself is not God's name.
No. So it's not anything about Hey going higher.
Hey is not a higher level. Hey is not a higher... No. Okay, takeaway message is very clear for all of us, yes? We need to care about others. We need to take time and effort to teach and inspire others. But, not like Noach did, not by preaching, but with chesed, with kindness, with love. Okay. So now, instead of a story, I'll end up with a very personal note. Because that is meant to be a personal class. We're meant to take life lessons for us from the people of the Bible. So, last week, I didn't say this, because I would rather say the positive than the negative. But there's many religious Jews that are afraid of engaging too much with the secular world in which we live. And for good reason. Secular world is full of many, I don't use the word evil, but like from a Jewish perspective, distraction, words and distractions, things that are no, distraction is too nice of a word. Much worse than distraction. Things that are by standards, I'll say it honestly, things that are by Torah standards evil. The world is full of evil. Not only evil but by many people in the room think evil, but by Torah standards, pure evil. Pure opposite of the Torah values and ethics. We're so into the world, people don't realize sometimes how the values and the standards and what we think is Torah, what we think is Judaism, what we think is holy, is actually such a perversion of truth. And they, like Noah, feel that the only way to raise children in a spiritual, holy environment is by being separated, by creating a space in between them and us. There's a them versus us mentality. 13 and a half years ago, my wife and I decided to move to Coral Springs. Not to my father's show, was allowed from people, but to specifically move to an area where there's no religious people. To start to live in a community where people are not going to be like us. People won't live like us, they won't eat like us, they won't watch the same things we watch, they won't talk about the things we talk about, they won't care about the things we care about, they won't live the lifestyle we live. Why? Why do we do that? Because we're inspired by Avraham. Avraham Avinu was the very first shliach. Avraham Avinu was the very first shliach who recognized the need to stand on the street and to stand proud, to stand loud and clear and say to the world, Vayakri, call out in the name of Hashem Kel Olam. Call out in the name of the God, the King of the universe. And Avraham was the first one to do that. And to me, one of the greatest role models of all of Judaism, of all who we're going to learn about, is Avraham was the first shliach, was the first one to recognize that I have to teach the world. Yud Shvat, 1951, when the Rebbe took leadership of Chabad, the very, very first Farbrengen, the inaugural address, so to say, of the Rebbe. 1951, when the Rebbe, his opening word as Rebbe, a lot to talk about that Farbrengen, but his opening address. One of the things he said at that night, in his inaugural Maimer in the Basi Lagani, he spoke about Avraham. And Avraham, that's what the Rebbe said, he recognized, and I really could, they have it on, I could have set it up, you can see the Rebbe saying it with the subtitles, there's a video of it, not video, there's an audio of it, with subtitles, and the Rebbe said, this is the opening address, his inaugural mission statement of our generation, that he was willing to go to all corners of the universe, to travel to wherever God would tell him. He didn't say, I need to stay in my own comfort zone, and stay in there where people don't think like me and be like me, and to go to the world, and to teach the world, you have to call the name of God. And as he said, if you don't know Aleph, if you don't know, whatever you teach, whatever you know, you have an obligation to teach. If all you know is Aleph Beis, teach Aleph Beis. If you don't even know the whole alphabet, but you know Aleph, teach Aleph. Teach Aleph. And this was the, so to say, the call of the hour. The description of what has to be the icon, the role model of our times in such a time of darkness and confusion and completely upside down values. Our role model is Avraham Avinu, who is willing to leave the world, leave his comfort, to care about others, to take care of others, to feed others physically, spiritually, to give them food for their body, to give them food for their soul, in order to teach the world. As the Rebbe said many times, every single Jew is a shliach. Any single Jew. If you know something, then you already have the power to teach somebody else. And this has to be our role model. Avraham is the first Jew. He's our father. And the behavior of Avraham is instilled and ingrained by inheritance to each and every one of us, that we have to become influencers to the world. Don't sit in your own little cocoon like Noah and say, well, there's me, there's us, and there's them. Avraham was a man that had no boundaries. He went wherever had to go to teach anyone that had to be spoken to, anyone that he saw that was in pain, that was hungry, that needed direction, physical or spiritual. Avraham was there unconditionally, without judgment, without condescending, without preaching, without explaining why you're terrible and you're wrong and I'm right, but by love, with chesed, he was able to change the entire world. And that is the message, the life lesson for us from Avraham. Okay. Any questions?
It would be harsh.
What?
It's harsh. It's
What's harsh?
to say, if there are some enemies of us, why would I pray for them? I understand you saying, yes, everybody unconditionally and all that, but if I see people that...
Unconditional means that the moment you say unconditional, but they don't think like me, that's not unconditional anymore. You know what unconditional means?
But I can swallow that. I can swallow the fact that the rabbi was like praying for the Muslims, or the Nazis, what they did to us. It's also people, but it's also people. It's everybody's people, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard for me to.
Remember the story,
Yes.
okay? I forgot which senator it was. There was a senator. You can find it in a second if you go search online. He was asked to come meet with the Rebbe, senator from New York. He was a mayor of New York, so he came to meet the Rebbe. Many politicians would come to meet the Rebbe. And came with Yichud, he was sure, they had a whole conversation, he was like waiting, the Rebbe, at the end of the meeting, the Rebbe asked him, I want to ask you a favor, ask you something. So he was waiting, like that's what he was expecting. You come to a meeting and constituents are always asking for things for their neighborhood, for their community, funding for this school, funding for that, whatever. So the Rebbe tells this senator from New York, they should know that there's an entire community of hard-working, good, ethical people in Chinatown. Chinese immigrants that are good people, but they don't know how to speak the language, and they don't know how to access the benefits and whatever is available to help them to acclimate into America. So life is very hard for them, and they're like neglected because no one's fighting for them, and they deserve some help, some attention. They're not getting what they need and what they deserve because they don't know how. There's no one that's advocating for them because they don't know how to advocate in the system. So the Rebbe was asking this senator, not for funding for Krohait, for more schools, or for more police, or for more this. He was asking the senator that in Chinatown, there's Chinese immigrants that are being neglected and not being taken care of. Okay? This was our role model. Avram didn't just worry about religion. Avram cared for people no matter what they needed. No matter what they needed. They needed food, they needed shelter, he was there for them. They were kidnapped by stone, by light. We know the story of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. You were arrested, you're kidnapped by enemy. I'll go fight for you. And that's why we see whenever there's a tsunami, a hurricane, Chabad on the ground already.
Yeah, always there.
How does feeding people after a hurricane fit into a religious mission of teaching the truth of Torah? Because our mission is not just to teach Torah. Our mission is to care about each and every Jew. If I care about you, so then if you're hungry and if you're living without electricity, my home is open so you can come and charge your phone or whatever food you need. And if I care about you and I see that you're farblunget, farblunget means that you're confused in the world of darkness and you don't have clarity in what's right and wrong and what's up and down, so I have a moral obligation, not to sit home and just relax and say it's worked all day and I'm going to take my but to come and to teach and to inspire and to teach the truth of God and the truth of Torah. That's what unconditional love means. If there's a reason why it's limited only if you deserve it and only because you like me and only because you think like me, etc., then that's not unconditional anymore. That's not unconditional. Yes?
Yes, more like him.
No one wants to move. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? You're welcome. See you next week. So next week, first of all, I forgot about flyers. JLI. When you say just run next door, that's on the table, like the outsmart, the JLI flyers. JLI starting in 2 weeks. Outsmarting anti-Semitism. I wanted to put the flyers on the tables. I forgot. Join us. We're doing a class Tuesday night and on Wednesday morning, God willing. We have a very, very good series. And then next week, Monday night, 8 p.m. is Lot, a little lesser known member of our story. Yeah, in the city of Stone. Okay, want to pass this out? Tracy, you want one of those flyers? Yeah. What, next week? JLI, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism, which is the flyer you have, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. starting Tuesday, October 26th, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. It's going to be an excellent course. Please do join us.